Welcome to Deep Drinks Podcast. Today's guest is a beacon of skepticism and reason, a compelling figure in the often heated intersection of science, faith, and apologetics. Known for his popular YouTube channel and his deep dives into evolution/creation debate. I give you the insightful, the amazing Apologia. Welcome, Apologia, to Deep Drinks Podcast. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing all right. I do not consider myself a beacon. I consider myself a cautionary tale.
That's awesome. It's funny because like I think you are a beacon. I think you're like the. We'll get into it. But first, before we jump into it, what are we drinking tonight, Paul?
All right. So we are going to, as I enjoy doing, I mix drinks because I didn't start drinking till late in life and my liver's fresh and whatever. It's all good. But so I have selected for us Hornitos Black Tequila.
This is the one I got.
It's similar, yeah. To be followed by I think it's the same thing. And then we'll be followed by rum and coke, which is my drink of choice in general. So I didn't pre-prepare. I wanted to make sure everyone knows that this is real and not just water or something.
Well, I need to preface this because I cannot get this in Australia. The only place I could find this in Australia was on eBay, and the seal was a little funny.
Oh no!
And this is like really loose. Can you hear that?
I can hear that.
But you know what? It's just
it's
just disconnected.
Some tequila it has worms inside sometimes. So tequila I'm not worried about germs per se. If it, who knows what they will.
Yeah, no, the alcohol will kill it. I just hope I don't get like roofied or something. I don't know.
It's a little sus, but
but anyway, here I'm pouring mine as well.
Okay.
I've never had Black Barrel tequila.
I didn't give you a pre-warning about. I haven't had my tequila with my proper ritual since I moved to Nova Scotia. So I actually decided for tonight, because this is such a special occasion, that I wanted to do the full ritual, which is you start with salt.
Yep.
And then you do the tequila, and then you suck on a lime for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that one. I don't have that one.
But just straight to tequila, if that's what you got, no worries.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put salt on my hand. I'm assuming you don't have the other ingredients handy because it's not a cooking show.
I could go get them, but I think I'll just.
No, I think I'm going to do the salt.
Yeah.
Now we do the shot.
Oh, that's good.
Isn't that good?
Oh, that's my favorite. Good.
That's my favorite go-to tequila. You can get tequila that's hundreds of dollars, of course, and that's delicious as well. But this is my favorite of the pedestrian tequilas.
Like the go-to, yeah.
Yeah.
There's I recently had a Mexican themed party, which for some reason I seem to do. It's not Mexican themed. It was just tequila and tacos, but that seems to be what I do every year. And everyone brought me tequila. I have so much tequila in this house. And someone brought me like a $250 bottle of tequila. I haven't opened it yet. And they said not shotting. This is sipping tequila. And I was like, all right, sipping tequila. I didn't know you'd do that, but okay, cool. So yeah, we got and with deep drinks, we have so many drinks. You can make a million different cocktails with we got a whole cupboard just full of just different liquors, like just really abstract ones like cucumber vodka or whatever, just because every guest wants something different. And a lot of them choose alcoholic. So
and Shannon, who you've had on your channel before, is an excellent mixer of drinks. That's opened my horizons greatly. But I managed to for the rum, I borrowed some of her Raging Crow spiced apple because normally the rums I drink are too pedestrian for her liking. So special for Shannon. I have some slightly better rum tonight.
So I'll pour myself a rum as I tell this story. So when Shannon came on, it was so funny because we had this specific rum that she liked, and I ended up finding it and stuff. And then when we ended up starting the show, she didn't have it, and she's like, "Oh no!" And she had to drink your rum. I remember, and she was complaining about it, and I was like, "This is actually perfect because Shannon drinks rum. That's just the like, instead of, because I normally put the bottle of the brand, I was like, no, we're just gonna have a bottle that just says rum. That's what Shannon drinks." And it ended up being one of the last episodes we did before we went to the live format. So
okay.
Shannon will always have a special place in my Deep Drinks heart, because it was really nice for her to come on when I was that small. So first of all, this is the as I pour myself this drink, and as I've already said, this is a question that I normally save for the end of the episode.
Oh, I'm not boring. We're just done now. Okay, all right, I get you.
I'm going to throw it straight at you at this moment. So you've said that Ken Ham made you an atheist. It's possible. I don't know if you could give it. For me, you could say the same thing, but someone could make the case that he made me an atheist as well, because there's this one question in the Bill Nye versus Ken Ham debate that was asked right at the end, that's become a staple on the Deep Drinks platform, that when he answered it, I was just floored. As a Christian, I was watching this and I just could not believe how he answered this question. And it's a question that I would like to ask you in regard. You've got hundreds of videos, you've got an amazing channel, you've done a lot of research, you know your stuff. So in regards to the young Earth creationism debate, the type of creationism I guess you used to believe in.
Correct. Yep.
The question is, what, if anything, would change your mind?
What, if anything, would change my mind in terms of Christianity would be different than young Earth creationism. Young Earth creationism, I think I would have to give the same answer that Bill Nye gave, and Bill Nye gave the answer like the Precambrian rabbit, right? Like we're finding later developed species, or a human below the KT boundary, for example, that kind of thing, right? That would definitely be enough to shake my scientific views on the diversity of life, for sure. Christianity, I'm not even sure what so Christianity actually is an easier. Christianity would be, I would need probably some kind of personal experience, which would be not good enough evidence for anyone else but for me, because that no matter what personal experience God could engage with me, that wouldn't be good enough for anyone else. But and that would need to be, for me, something externally verified. Whatever experiences was of God, I would need to be able to verify it, that it wasn't just me hallucinating. So it would need to be giving me new information that I didn't have access to, for example. And or if it was visual and auditory, that my phone could have also recorded it at the same time, or something along those lines. Because for me at this point, I don't see how testimony can ever rise to the level of being more probable than merely being mistaken and or lying, right? So like yet another scroll or more confirmation from history, for me, probably doesn't cut it if it's still in that realm of just testimony. So I guess are those reasonable answers to the question?
Yeah, I think so. I'm actually, I want to get into your story a little bit, but I was wondering if I can just push back quickly a little bit on that.
Yeah.
I find when it comes to so I don't know. We'll get into this, but I don't know what kind of relationship you had with Jesus. I don't know what kind of Christian you were.
I was talking to Jesus 8 times a day. If I lost my contact lens before I bent down to the ground, I'm already talking to Jesus about it. If I'm lost somewhere, I'm talking to Jesus. If I'm in an exam and the questions are getting hard, I'm talking to Jesus. Like this was a personal assistant almost type of situation with Jesus. Where all through my whole time being a Christian, he was Jesus is the co-pilot of my life. Absolutely.
Okay.
Anyway, I interrupted you, and then let's carry on.
So what I was gonna, okay. So for me, I remember I was brought up a Christian when I was younger. I ended up becoming like getting involved in church, and then kind of walking away when I moved up with my father to be in Queensland. And anyway, I ended up going to the youth group, having a really powerful quote unquote spiritual experience. I ended up crying, as a 16-year-old in front of everyone. I had people prophesy over me, all that kind of stuff. And and I remember going to, it was a Pentecostal church. I remember going to a youth group 3 weeks after, and I saw one of my friends there like pass out in worship, like fall over, someone catch the sun. I saw another person, my friend ended up being one of my groomsmen, thrashing around on the floor after being baptized in a kind of shaking seizure-like state, but his arms went out like he was being crucified on the cross, and he was for ages, like I'm talking hours, and like we picked him, I had to pick him up and carrying him inside, and we're kind of laughing at him, and like we're praying at the same time, and it was, and I remember looking around at the room full of, we had to skip dinner because we pulled out all the mattresses, and it felt like a revival, and everyone was like pulled out all the mattresses and put them on the ground. We're praying for each other, and the crew were like, what? No one's coming for dinner, and we're just all in this room praying. And I remember looking around and seeing these things happen and saying, I can never deny this. I can never deny these experiences. Like, no matter what happens in my life, what I'm seeing right now, I can never deny. Now, I don't deny that they happened.
Right.
I just deny the conclusion. So I wonder, like, you mentioned that like you'd have to have some sort of personal experience. What if, can that ever be good enough? Because what if, like you said, that there's like, how could you verify such a thing that that would sufficiently, warrant belief? Like, how could you do that?
Well, I'm assuming that an all-powerful God knows the answer to that question, even if I don't. I do have in my head, I have, for example, what I mentioned before was, if there's any sensory perception involved, like audio or visual, then I need my phone. I need to be able to pick up my phone, and for that to have recorded it, or for other people in the room to be able to also have seen it. Like, for example, the Apostle Paul, according to Acts, depending on which chapter you read, the people with him couldn't see what he saw or hear what he heard, right? Like that's indicative of a very internal vision experience. But also, I've talked about how I would love to, Jesus comes to me and he tells me the solution to one of the 10 great unsolved math problems, something that I know that I do not have the skill to solve. Right. Yeah. But God, Jesus, now that's maybe that's people say that that's kind of an extreme example. All of a sudden I'm altering human history which is my personal attraction. That's okay. I'm sure Jesus can give me personal information that I don't currently have, that I could then go corroborate. Like Jesus would be able to, in some way, give me some of it. But again, I think that would be not a good reason for anyone besides myself to believe that there would just. I just have to think that an omnipotent God can solve that problem, even if you and I can't know what that would be. Though I do talk to presuppositionalists, a lot of whom were creationists, and they talk about the certainty which they have. Right? They are 100% certain. Oh, dog issues.
It's okay. We've got a beagle as well, like I mentioned to you before the stream. So I know that.
So. Of course, if it's possible to be 100% certain about something non-divine, then you actually can't be sure that there's any. What would that gap be that you could? What would be the difference between this thing I'm 100% sure of, just on a naturalistic basis, versus the 100% certainty that a God gave me? That is I think, a problem with the whole presuppositionalist position. So it's an excellent question. I'm just, when people ask me that, what would change my mind, I do want to throw out there that, this is kind of the best I got. But also leaving open the fact that if an omnipotent, omniscient God wanted me to know who he was, that he would have this answer to this problem, even if I don't. So
Yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. Like it's a huge problem for whatever this experience would be. You were talking about the experiences you saw. My baptism was my greatest day of my life. I just felt the love of Jesus just, flowing over me. Like that's the closest I ever felt with Jesus was that baptism day.
Wow.
But I think I now look at it and I misattributed those feelings, right? The feelings that I had were there was a whole community of people in front of me who were looking at me and like affirming my spiritual steps and affirming my spiritual work. Like it's natural that when a whole community is around you and it's your day, that's going to be a spiritual high. Like that just makes sense. And and the particular songs are chosen that I chose that are like the ones that stir up my emotions like that. So I now see, as I think as you probably do, correct me if I'm wrong, but that we were just misattributing those emotions and those feelings to something supernatural when that needn't necessarily be the case. Do you agree with that?
Well, 100%. I've said this a few times that even now when I read parts of the Bible, I'll get that warm feeling that like, whoa, I'm so inspired, or other parts not so much. I've learned a lot about slavery and misogyny and all that shit. But some parts, like I think 1 John, God is light and in him there's no darkness. I go, whoa, I get filled with this feeling. But the same thing happened to me when I was in Bali, poolside, drunk. My wife was, techno going off, and I had my headphones in, and I was listening to the Bhagavad Gita, just chilling out. And I was listening to it because Bali's a Hindu island, and chapter 6 came around on the Bhagavad Gita, and it was like, I am the fire, and I am the wood, and the fire that consumes it. I am the beginning, I am the end, and all this stuff. And I was like, whoa, and like, like I'm like, this is incredible stuff. It's just, because it's in a spirit for me, because it's in a spiritual religious context. I go, it's very easy to go, there must be something to this. But just look at the stuff people are going on about with Taylor Swift. Like people are like, this was the most important moment of my life. Like I had like people talking about Taylor Swift concert like it's a spiritual experience. And my wife has said before that when she goes to musicals, she has the exact same feelings she used to have when she went to church. She's obsessed with musicals. So,
I was a worship leader for decades. And we literally would plan. I don't know why it didn't connect for me while I was doing this. We would plan our sets, with tempo and with all those and with momentum of it all in mind. Like I was orchestrating those feelings for the congregation.
Yeah,
but I didn't put 2 and 2 together. That like, was that done for me when I was a youth kid? Like it, yeah. And we used to take the kids out and like. Especially youth functions, we would take them and they'd be separated from their parents, which when you're a teenager is a big thing. You're away from some of those safety nets and or the relief that feels from being away from that. We are giving them junk food. We're keeping them up way later than they normally do. And we deliberately we put out this generic message of, do you feel like you don't fit in? Like what teenager feels like they fit in? Of course you don't feel like you'll fit in. Like it's all just, I see it now. What I was doing was manipulating these situations. So
it wasn't.
I stomped on your point there. I'm sorry.
No, stomp away. This is hey, and if I apologize if I stop on one of your points, especially as the alcohol starts to affect it, it gets harder and harder to be.
It's your show, man.
But stomp away, please. But what I was saying is, you almost. I knew this was happening. Like I used to hear, and I think I used to even say that the preacher's job is to get the audience to walk to the end of the diving board and then jump off into the Holy Spirit. That their job is to, and I used to do this thing, I've said it a million times, where I'd say, I'd do an altar call and I would count down or I'd count up and I'd say, on 3, I want you to raise your hands. So I'd say 1, God loves you. If you feel God pounding in your heart, that's the Holy Spirit calling you. 2, this is the most important day of your life. Don't go away missing this. And then I go 3, raise your hand. And heaps of people raise their hand because I'm building suspense. I'm talking about all their physiological feelings that they may be feeling when they're bowing their heads. And it's I knew it was manipulative, but I thought it was good. Do you know what I mean? It's like I thought it was encouraging someone to get past their worldly glasses, and open their spirit up. And I've heard that. I wasn't in the band. I'm a bit tone deaf and not very talented. But I heard people who would go and worship retreats and stuff, and they would say like, this chord is a minor chord, so it does this, and it elicits this emotion, and like you would learn about, and everyone was writing notes like, this is amazing, this is great. So write a worship song with these notes, and it will give this kind of emotion, and no one thought anything of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I suppose they just figured that this is all in the service of that God created chords and God created scales and disharmonies and things like that. So of course these are tools that He wants us to use. But yeah, we should have been able to affirm that.
So can you talk a little bit about growing up a Christian? Were you a Christian throughout your whole life? Like, were you brought up in the faith, or did you have a spiritual experience? Like, what kind of Christian were you?
So I grew up as a Mennonite. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before. Or that
I've heard you say the term, and I know.
Right. So I don't know if are you familiar with the phrase Amish?
Yes.
So Mennonites are like the Amish, but 50 years ahead. So whatever technology, and it's a sliding scale. I've laughed because I'm now old enough to watch this scale slide for both those communities. Grow slowly forward. The Amish want to be 80 years behind, and the Mennonites want to be 50 years behind. But so I was, if anyone saw the movie Witness, so that wasn't my day-to-day, but it was my parents' day-to-day. I was one generation off the actual colony, but it was still Mennonite heritage. So what that is it's very evangelical in terms of, well, I should say very conservative. It's separation of the world is super important for Mennonites. So you can probably tell that like a huge thing is almost what the Old Testament Jews were doing. Like, is we are so separate that everyone can tell that we're obviously different. When I was a kid, we spoke. There was Low German in the worship service. I was just a few years past there being like women sat on one side, men sat on the other side.
Whoa.
Just so right from birth, this is part of my life. The religion is saturated into all of it. So I was that kind of Christian. When I got into high school, I had made friends with some more progressive type people. Progressive, I laugh only because they're like still staunchly conservative, but compared to what I would do. But I got into Bible quizzing, which was a Bible memorization competition style thing, and this was for a competitive young Paul. This was perfect. So we would memorize multiple books of the Bible every year and have travel around both the province and the country and internationally to literally compete with other teenagers who memorized the whole books of the Bible. And I earned my way into Bible college. Like, I had little full ride scholarships into Bible college that I won in my Bible quizzing days. So this is the type of Christian I was. I spent my summers, at Bible camps and, all those kind of things. So it was 24/7, 12 months a year, full tilt all the way, Christian, as far as I was concerned, competitively. So I borrow that phrase from Shannon too, but as competitive as it gets.
Competitive Christian.
So, and then went to Bible college, didn't end up going into full-time ministry. That was a big struggle between me and God. Does He want me to do other things? I felt like God was calling me to do lay ministry. So I ended up as I mentioned, I led Bible quizzing. I started Bible quizzing programs around North America. I was a worship leader, as I said, a youth leader, all those kind of things, while having a career. That was one of the weird compromises me and God made. It's funny how God, in the end, ultimately sort of agrees with what we want. Anyway, so. And that took me all the way up till I was in my early 40s. But as a part of all the style of Christian that I was, top-down authority was incredibly important. You know, man's the head of the home. Kids are subservient to the parents. The pastor, you know, is in charge of us, and you know, other people are in charge of the pastor. That is just top down is the way you accept things. And so I was trained that that's how you just learn things, top down. And so when I was told things like dinosaurs were on the ark 4,000 years ago, I'm like, all right, that's the way that was then. And you don't look any further. No need to look any further. Everyone in my community affirms this is true. Why would I go look to the heathens or go look to the other lesser Christians? Because of course the one true mark of being a Christian is that you don't consider other denominations to be Christians.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
that's the only consistent part of it.
I still, sorry to butt in, but I
don't know where I was going. So you're good.
No. Well, I still can't accept that. Like, I know this is like a prejudice, but there's a deep thing. I still can't emotionally accept that Catholics are Christians, even though they're the biggest denominations of. You know what I mean? Like, it was so pushed into me that Catholicism has nothing to do with Christianity. It's a religion. Well, nothing to do with a relationship with God. It's a religion. It's man-made. It's about wealth and it's just. Yeah, I can't see it as like I don't know. It's definitely a bias, for sure.
Oh yeah, for my denomination, Catholic might as well have been Jehovah's Witness or Mormon or something like that. Because it was there might be individual Catholics who were fine if they were lucky, just on some fluke. But as a denomination, no, that's not Christian. Yeah, I'm with you. I joke that I'm a Protestant atheist.
That's I'm so similar. So did the Mennonites, so that's really interesting. I didn't realize, did you have these like this baptism and stuff? Was that in the Mennonite church? Did you have spiritual experiences? Do they speak in tongues? Do they have healings, like prosperity gospel? Like what are the
I didn't believe? Your denomination I wouldn't have considered to be Christian either.
Neither of yours.
Anyone who was flailing around on the floor and speaking in tongues, that was a time past, and that wasn't for modern day.
Okay.
And that you're just making stuff up. You probably agree with that now. But no, so Mennonites came out of what was called an Anabaptist tradition, which is actually slightly before Martin Luther, in fact, where the big separation was they believed very strongly in against infant baptism, that it had to be believers' baptism. And that was actually, so baptism was hugely important because that was literally the schism that caused them to separate in the first place, was just this notion. They felt very strongly that you had to believe before you could be baptized. So, but then the other big tenet that came out of that was nonviolence, passivity. And so they actually ended up having to go region to region in Europe because they refused to become involved in the world wars at the time. They refused to accept being drafted and those kind of things. And so they ended up being like kind of draft dodgers going around and around. And they were very good at farming, and so kind of just settling new place to place, they became kind of pariahs because they were seemingly legitimately avoiding getting involved in conflict, but also kind of becoming rich everywhere they went because they were quite good at the craft of farming. So that's part of my heritage. But no, nothing showy. Like, so one of the things, like we had rules about how many buttons could be on your jacket, right? And you look at the images. Anyone's familiar with Mennonites, it's always modesty is the ultimate virtue. And so anything that would draw attention to yourself, like prophesying or speaking in tongues and that kind of thing, that would have been very frowned upon because it was incredibly community based. Like, we raised barns together. So we're spiritual together. We're not spiritual one at a time. If that makes sense.
I typed in Mennonite. Is this actually?
Yep.
Whoa.
So I was one generation out of this, but this was my parents' experience.
Whoa, okay.
So my parents were very radical, and they became teachers. They moved to the city and became, and that was a big deal. But we still went to Mennonite churches and things like that.
Wow. Okay. Wow. So do they, do they remain Mennonites or?
So you did ask me up front if there's anything I don't want to talk about. I don't necessarily want to drag my family into.
Can we talk about every one of your family members by name?
Yeah, let's. So out of respect for my family, I won't speak on behalf of any of them. But I will say that most of my family remain as devoutly Christian as before my experience, and that was a very difficult thing, of course, for everyone, because from their perspective, the Paul whom they know and love is now, my soul is in jeopardy, right? My soul is, they now look at a potential future where they are in heaven and I am not there. And that, rightfully so, is devastating. I actually feel like any Christian who really believes it should be equally heartbroken every time, like someone apostatizes. Like that should be terrible, terrible news. And it does tell me a little bit about some of the Christians who are like, whatever, you chose this, so you're just going to hell. That actually tells me a little bit about where their spiritual life is at. I'm judging them again with my old. I need to get one of those Jesus hats so I can temporarily tell people when I'm wearing the old hat. But so as you can imagine, for my family and friends, I mean, everyone in my circle was a Christian. I didn't. All my friends, all my associates, all my business relationships, that was the circle I was in. So. So it was a difficult situation, and one of those ones where people are like, well, it was very convenient for you to go and you just wanted to sin or whatever. It's like, no, I paid a very heavy price when I walked away, as do many. Like, that's not a unique story in any stretch. So more people, I think, leave the faith with tears than with joy. Let me just put it that way. Yeah.
It's for me, leaving the faith was one of the most heartbreaking but exciting times of my life. It was like entering an alien world where I kind of knew what everything was, but I didn't at the same time. When I was like, when I was driving and I was anxious, I couldn't pray anymore. Like it didn't work to like relieve my anxiety. When I was wondering what to do, I couldn't ask God or the guidance of the church. I felt very lost, but then at the same time, I was like, whoa, but wait, this fossil is actually 65 million years old. It's, we have Australia Zoo down the road, Steve Irwin's zoo. A few friends work there. And the only thing I like to do when we go there, we see the croc show and stuff, but I go to the fossil room and I just like buy fossils. They're like $30 and they're like, 25 million years old. And you're like, what? Like, how am I buying this for like $30? Like it's
right.
And just think that's actually that old. Like it's just, I still can't wrap my hand around it. It's incredible. So, and also I did want to mention too, I've heard you bring up your, not bring up, but be questioned about your family before. And you always, I should have remembered that you always say, like, I don't want to talk about my family. But one thing I will say is you're always super respectful when you talk about people's belief systems and your family's belief systems and things like that. You're always, that's one thing that I have always admired about you is you're very level-headed and very kind of respectful in the way you approach things. And I've always respected that.
Well, you spoke briefly there, and I just would say, like, a side effect of my channel, I didn't intend it this way, was that it kind of helped actually people be a soft place to land. Other places were a soft place to land for me, but I get a lot of people who write me like, I just recently left the faith or I fell apart and whatever. And I didn't know what words to use to express the new thoughts and feelings I was having. And they thanked me on my channel for like helping them figure out just how to even word what they were saying. And that becomes its own soft place in land because we don't even know how to express. We're so indoctrinated with all these things, how to express these things. So it's definitely soft place to land. Super important thing. And it's always, I always feel incredibly grateful if anyone messages me and says that I was a small part of that. And I'm sure I'm sure you get similar messages.
I do. I've had a few. I've actually spoken to a few people, and I always make it very clear from the outset that I don't care if they remain religious, if they become religious after talking to me. Like I'm not out here trying to evangelize atheism or anything like that. Even I consider myself a non-theist and atheist, but I want to help relieve some of that that mental anguish, because I know what it's like to have just these fears of hell or whatever it is, or that cognitive dissonance that you go through. And just helping people find a way is really rewarding, I think, for sure. And I will say, Paul, you play a huge role in my deconstruction, a big role, I'd say, because one of the videos I used to watch your channel all the time. I loved it, and I still do watch it occasionally. But Paul, for sure, that sounded. I used to watch it all the time. I had to.
That's fair. No, because I too, I watch less content that I agree with. I think that's a good choice. Ultimately, one should end up making later on is that you should skew what you consume to the attitudes you disagree with more than probably the ones you agree with, because the social media algorithms are so want to shove down our throats what we agree with that you kind of have to deliberately seek out the others. Anyway, carry on.
I just wanted to like I have beef with you. Like what I'm saying is I used to binge it.
I get it.
Yeah. But one of the
You're not hurting my feelings. I want Christians. I don't care if atheists watch my channel, frankly.
Yeah.
I would if I could choose my audience, it would be 100% Christians or not 80% Christians and 20% the people who are like just believing. Anyway, carry on.
Well, there was an episode that you did that really like just we'll get into this in the future, but there's an episode you did that really was like a nail in the coffin for me. There's a few nails in the coffin I had when deconstructing parts of my faith, prayer, healing, the Bible's inerrancy, and all that, like young earth creationism, and then within them there was a bunch of nails, and you hit like there was a big moment for me in one of your episodes, and we'll talk about that in the future. But I do in a little bit, but I just want to quickly. Not quickly, but I would like to talk a little bit about how you went from being a Mennonite Christian to deconstructing. How did that happen?
So around 2015, I was at an interesting spot in my career where my work was a little bit more sporadic. It was very intense for short bursts of time and then off for short bursts of time. And one of the things I was doing at the time was I owned a comic book company named Red 5 Comics, and I was writing a graphic novel called Neozoic, and it involved dinosaurs. And of course, here I am. I'm aware that my view on dinosaurs is different than most of the rest of the world's views on dinosaurs. The series was to be sold to a general public, not to a Christian public. So I'm like, I should probably look up some details about what the so-called secular scientists think that dinosaurs are. Like, let me at least nod my head to the people who are stupid enough to believe that they're old, right? And so I'm looking up, well, when did dinosaurs go extinct and things like that. And as I'm reading it, it's like, and I've loved dinosaurs all my life. I live in Western Canada, like it's dinosaur central. I just didn't buy the narrative. But here I am. I'm like, hey, this kind of weirdly makes sense. Like, it's not as stupid on the surface as my pastors and teachers, made it seem like I was going to be laughing at this as I read. So that just put this pebble in my shoe, as it were. It's like, well, how does this make sense if it's not supposed to? I set that aside, and then I get to this point where I had a bit of a lull with what was happening in my job. I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go read the best creationist books that are out there, because I've always just accepted this on authority. Fine, but let me just go so I can put this to bed and like laugh again at these weird secularists. I'm going to, what's the best one? Oh, the best one is Ken Ham. Let me order up all the Ken Ham books, and I'm going to read those, and it will all be solved. And I'm reading the Ken Ham books that come from Amazon, and partway through the first one, near the end of the first one, the book just fell to the floor as I'm like, these are the worst answers possible. These are terrible. These are not good answers. I believe what Ken Ham believes, but his justifications don't make any sense at all. And that prompted then, okay, I better go. Maybe I should go read what these secular people say. What do they have to say about? I mean, Christianity's not in jeopardy at this point. Like that's nothing. That's all just young Earth creationism. How old is the Earth? And I start reading, the best biology books I can get and the best books about geology, like all the science stuff that I kind of didn't pay much attention to when I was younger. And it's like, this all makes complete sense. And every time I turn to young Earth creationist thing, their answers seem credulous and strained and seem to be not paying attention to the data. And that became this huge crisis for me. It's like, well, if I'm wrong about that, because to me now it gets the human chromosome 2 and fusion and endogenous retroviruses. It's like, well, this is just true. Like, I just can't deny this anymore. We evolved. So now what else? What else did I accept on faith that I shouldn't have? And so I laugh at, like, Ken Ham didn't really make me an atheist. That was a hyperbolic title for my very first video, deliberately hyperbolic. But he what he did set in motion was this idea of, well, can I come to an idea neutrally? Can I come to it and not have a predetermined conclusion? And then what can I build from scratch? And when I approached the New Testament that way, or the Old Testament that way, or a lot of church history that way, man, a lot of it just, I couldn't reconstruct it without having a preconceived notion that it was true the way I used to, the way in Bible school. And then I start looking back at like all of my pastors and my teachers and Bible school and all those professors, and I start talking to even some of them, and it's like, oh yeah, we knew about those problems, but we just didn't want to bother people. Like, the congregation can't be bothered with knowing that, that woman caught in adultery story wasn't really there, or that the books are anonymous, and that the Gospels names were added in around 180 AD based on some dubious testimony. Like, we just don't want to bother the congregation with those kind of details. It's like, well, that's not good enough, right? So when I started to try and rebuild my faith, which was my goal, I couldn't. And so then I entered this phase of, okay, I can't accept the Bible anymore. I can't accept, all the science stuff that I used to accept. But Jesus is still my friend. Jesus is still my savior. I can still feel all the emotions, and I still got that sense with me. And so then I had a period of just wrestling with the person who I thought was on the other end of the phone for months, like begging the Holy Spirit to tell me that this was all fine, right? And then those answers just never came. And then I start realizing, oh man, I've just had an invisible friend all this time, until it came to that final run on a treadmill to, some Christian songs. And it's like, okay, I'm letting this go. Like, God is not responding back to me. So it was all the phases, intellectual first, but then I was willing to not worry about the intellectual part if God could just show me something else. And that also didn't happen. So that was probably too long an answer, but that's sort of
definitely not too long. And it's just so reminiscent of like the deconstruct. I've talked to a lot of people at this stage, and the process of like peeking under that rug and finally, what I say is, I noticed, I decided that it was intellectually dishonest for me to look at the evidence and assume it's one way or the other, like assume that I'm a Christian and therefore this evidence is right or wrong, and I need to look at it. And then I realized I had to remove that presupposition. I need to look at the evidence for what it is and let that lead me to whatever the true reality is for any given small thing in my brain. And I remember I mentally took off my God helmet, my God glasses, and said, I'm going to look at this evidence as an atheist, like as someone. I'm not going to assume anything. I'm going to try and remove as much of me as possible. I'm not going to look at this as a male. I'm not going to look at this as I'm just going to look at the data and just try and see what it says. And then when I did that, I noticed a small little crack, and I put my God helmet back on, and I was like, that was interesting. I saw a crack. And then, months later, I'm standing in a canyon, and that crack's huge. I'm going, what the fuck? And then when I'm talking to people about this, I'm like, there's this huge canyon. And then they were very dishonest with like how they approached. They weren't willing to do that analysis, and it was really they weren't willing to be honest. You know, they weren't willing to do that, and they're being very dishonest about it. And for me, that was it was really confusing and hard and everything like that. But the point is, and this was a bit rambly, sorry, the alcohol, but the point is that once you peak, you can't just like pretend like you didn't see it. Like you can't.
Right.
This is something I talked to my neighbor who was a Christian at the time. I said, I can't like, and their face just went blank, and you could tell they just stopped listening or they just shut off. But I was like, I can't just like, I would either just pretend like I didn't see it. It would just be a big farce, and I would just be acting as if I'm a Christian, but I actually didn't believe. But you can't just not see it. You can't just not, you know what I mean? Like it's
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, you can't just Pascal wager yourself to it. Let's just God. Any God who wants to save me knows if I'm pretending that it's true just for the sake of fire insurance. Like, you know, that's not going to work.
So you mentioned, I heard you talking in another series about kangaroos hopping to Australia, and
yes.
Ken Ham. By the way,
I've got that was the answer. That look at you.
I can't make it to the Ark Encounter.
I really wanted that book. That it wasn't available when I went there. So yeah,
I ordered it online, and I have to apologize too. Ken Ham comes from the university only like an hour down the road from me.
Yeah.
So I have to apologize about that for sending him to the northern hemisphere.
Yeah, the kangaroo. How did the kangaroos get to Australia? Was literally the question I was on that made me drop the book. I'm like, well, this doesn't make any sense at all. So the two proposals were either that they jumped on some logs, and those logs floated from India or so to Australia, and they just survived. That was fine.
Can logs float for over a year? Because this is the whole. Like, they would have sunk in a, yeah, okay.
No, so this was so imagine this. So Noah lands in Ararat, Middle East, Turkey. Noah lands in Turkey for those of you. And there's two kangaroos, and two koalas, like the marsupials that are we now consider they're native to Australia. Yeah, they're in Turkey, two of them. And they have to get from Turkey to Australia, leaving not a single bone behind. Like it's not like it could be multiple generations. Like that's not off the table for someone like Ken Ham. Like it took him generations to get down there, but none of them would have branched off and stayed where they were and created populations. They all made a beeline. And the way they got from Turkey to Australia was either jumping on these logs. Or the other proposal was perhaps that volcanic activity literally was helping blast things into the air, and perhaps that the pair of kangaroos were caught up in some kind of volcanic blast, and that like at least helped them get part of the way, if not over the water. And as a Christian who totally was on board for this, I'm like, that's not good. Like that's not an answer.
and were they actually? They were the real answers, right? These are what
those were the and it's like no. That's not acceptable. And then of course I didn't understand. I didn't know at the time biology the way I do better now. I'm still terrible, but like the fact that marsupials are pretty much like that whole branch of marsupials is just on Australia. But Ken Ham wouldn't consider them to be of the same kind. Like, he doesn't think there was a marsupial kind. So all of them, like the koalas, everything had to make that same trek. And the koalas that can only eat, is it eucalyptus leaves or whatever it is? Like that, they have that specific diet that's only available down there.
No. It gets way worse. It gets way worse than that. And let me just tell you about this. So when I was deconstructing, I forgot about this until just now. So excuse me, but this was my own. I used to make out these little like arguments, and I would like try and like work things out, and I would like make little. This is one of the things I did for this exact problem. And so I actually went into some textbooks, and I'm not sure if you can see that properly, but I found, total plants in Australia, there are 21,000, 86% are endemic. Okay. There are 335 mammals that are only found in Australia, 852 reptiles only found in Australia, and 215 amphibia that are only found in Australia. And the shortest distance I worked out here that have to go, 11,500 kilometers through Mount Ararat, from Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, before crossing a land bridge that has since disappeared. And there's no, so this is like, I looked right into it, but it gets way, 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 way worse than that because, like I said, I have friends who work at the Australian Zoo and the Australian Wildlife Hospital, and they spend, our old roommate, she got a tattoo of a koala, one of the koalas that she took care of, on her leg. Worked very closely with koalas. They will choose, this is exact words, they will choose to die in the tree rather than eat the specific eucalyptus variant that they want at the time. They'll eat leaves further up in the tree at the different times of the year and different in how they're feeling. They'll eat younger leaves, older leaves. You can't even move a koala from one part of Australia to like 200 kilometers away where they have a different species of eucalyptus because they'll choose to die. They'll starve to death. They're actually smooth brained. They actually don't have any dimples in their brain, and they're really dumb. But the way they survived is that all their energy goes to just chewing on eucalyptus leaves. And so what my friends would do, Kennedy, what she would do, she called it leaf shopping, and they would grab a koala in the wildlife hospital and they would walk around, and people would have to bring in these huge amounts of leaves on branches from different eucalyptus trees all over, from everywhere. And they would have to go leaf shopping, and they have to go, do you want these ones? And they go, no. Do you want these ones? No. And they'd have to do that all because otherwise these koalas just die. They just die because they're too sick to get to the trees they want, and they won't eat anything they don't want. And I remember looking at koalas, and I'm like, koalas are a specific problem because they're very slow. They can't survive on anything else. And one of the answers I saw was that maybe, this is what someone said, maybe Noah crushed up eucalyptus leaves that for some reason were in the Middle East and have since only become in Australia, and crushed them up, got the oil out of the leaves and sprayed that on different like hay and stuff, and that's what they were eating for the year that they're on the ark. And I'm like, and I even calculated how long it would take for a eucalyptus tree to grow after the flood if a seed floated to Australia. And it's just at this stage you're getting to like levels of like reality denial. Like you may as well become like get into QAnon and like flat earth and all that stuff, because it's like at this stage like everything is conspiracy, nothing is what it seems like. It's just
well, if you're a Christian, like if I look back, and actually some of the times I'm like, well, if I still believe that, like a much better argument is that God just knew this was a problem, and for those particular koalas made them non-fussy. Right? But younger creationists don't like to do that because they want the artifice of science. So they try to avoid God just did it as often as possible, and probably to their own detriment, because then the other arguments end up sounding silly. They probably, like, I don't know if you saw the Noah movie with
Emma Watson.
Yes.
Was she not? Yeah. No, I haven't.
With Russell Crowe.
Darren Aronofsky. Is he
yes,
the director?
Aronofsky. Anyway, that film, in the way they solved the animal problem in that film was Noah's wife had become inspired by this particular type of incense that just knocked the animals out, just made them sleep. And that was such a much better answer than anything I'd ever heard as a young earth creationist. It's like, no, why wouldn't God? But you wouldn't even need that. God could just literally put those. If he's flooding the world, he can just put animals to sleep for a year. But no, Ken Cam can't do that. What he has to do is, I don't know if you probably haven't been to the Ark. He's got diagrams of, like, because the Ark specifically says there's one window. The Bible says one window, and it's way at the top. So how are we getting all the poop and the water? Like, are we getting water in and the poop out? Like, and there's this elaborate pulley system, like a mousetrap game, like a Rubik thing that the Answers in Genesis team have come up with that is plausible, right? Using that technology, but it is, if they would just say God did it. And embrace that, you wouldn't have to be quite as silly to people who are thinking about it. But Anyway,
maybe I think you could maybe say I've heard someone say this, that maybe God created like repopulated the world with animals after the ark, and then you're like, but one, it doesn't say that, and two, what's the point of the ark, and then three, so it's like maybe it's like when God rested. Like I had this Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity had a freak out when I said, by the way, an all powerful God shouldn't need to rest on the seventh day. He had a big freak out on Twitter about it, but it's like, he said he didn't need to rest, he chose to rest. And then another part of the Bible says that he was running out of puff, that he was exhausted. The alcohol's affecting me, but he was essentially exhausted. And I was like, what? And I'll pass this conversation with Cameron now, and I'm like, what would Cameron argue here? That maybe that he was like choosing to be exhausted, like he wasn't like actually exhausted, he was choosing, because everyone was saying to me, God stopped from resting as an example to us. So maybe you could argue, well, he wanted Noah to be obedient. That was the point. So it didn't matter that he repopulated the world afterwards with all the animals in their right spots. I don't know. Maybe you could make it work like that, but still.
Well, yeah, and that whole God did it problem, actually, that's why it's so powerful. It doesn't actually help the once we got off the ark, because then you're positing that God, like literally, like Star Trek style, transported animals away or something, right?
Well, which would be cool. I mean,
which would be cool, but like the fact that as you say, these koalas, they took 1,000 years to get from Ararat to, they didn't leave a single bone, they didn't leave a single ancestor, like they all just were in unison, marched down. I don't know.
It's also what's that? It's a type of argument technique where you I don't know. One of the things that I noticed though is Aboriginal Australians have been here. We've got cave painting from 40,000 years ago. That they're the oldest living culture in existence, and Ken Ham would know this. He has a degree in environmental biology. Like he would know this, especially.
I believe his degree is in teaching, actually. But
okay, yeah, I think. Well, when I looked it up, according to Wikipedia,
it could be. It could be. He may have. I think he has actually a master's, so one maybe education, and he would carry on.
Yeah, but either way, as an Australian, he'd know that Aboriginals have been here for a long time, and we have evidence of them, and they didn't notice a global flood. So it's
right.
So
or China, or those other civilizations. Egypt didn't notice. Yeah.
Oh, you hear that? Did you hear that? That was
your beagle.
I'm
glad my beagle can't hear your beagle because of the headphones. Because it'd be a duet.
Duet. So one of the things that let's get to apologetics, because one of the things I wanted to touch on was the nail in the coffin. I mentioned this before for me.
Okay.
And you kind of pointed out that it was the first episode you ever made before you. But you didn't release it first, but it was the first episode you ever made. And let me tell you, this was a game changer for me. So it's your episode on polystrate fossils, upright fossils, polystrate trees. And so maybe could you explain some context of like maybe what an upright fossil is, or what a polystrate fossil is?
So, and oddly enough, I've now moved to a different part of Canada, to Nova Scotia, where these specific fossils that I made that video about are, and I still haven't, because of the pandemic and stuff, I actually haven't gone to visit them yet. I need to do that. Shannon, we can make a note. Maybe I just need to go on my own pilgrimage sometime. Anyway, so there are places in the fossil record where we find fossilized trees that are up and down, that appear even in some places to perhaps cross different types of strata, cross different types of what we might even consider to be an era break. Anyway, so yeah, it's these, and so someone like Ken Ham or Kent Hovind or any younger creationists can say, well, look, these fossils were buried upright. Like it all happened so fast that the trees were just buried in place upright, and what we think are these layers that represent different geological ages obviously can't, because the same tree would have, you can't bury the bottom part of the tree, and then like millions of years later, the next part of the tree was buried, and then millions of years later, the next part of the tree was buried. And this is actually quite a compelling argument to a layperson, right? That actually looks makes sense. Yeah, that tree is totally vertical and going through what from a layperson's eyes also looks like different types of rock and different types of strata. And you listen to that story of what they're proposing, like, yeah, that tree totally would rot before it got buried that way. So, and they always represent it as that scientists think that these things get buried slowly. That's the biggest probably young Earth creation lie, is that's what these dumb scientists think, that a dinosaur died and it gets slowly covered a centimeter a year until 100 years later it's finally covered with debris. So that is that a good enough explanation for your audience?
Yeah, no, that is. And it's it was a big question for me. I was like, how are these fossils, these trees, growing up through rock layers? And I was concerned about this. And I Google it, and sure enough, your video pops up. And this will get into the next question I have for you, which is preview for the question I'm going to ask is what do you think? Do you think creationists are being honest or dishonest? And we'll get into that. But let me just share this video.
All right.
Okay, here we go.
I'm going to cringe because this is like the first video I ever made for this channel. So production quality, I'm sorry, everybody.
Oh, that's awesome. And do you know what my favorite part is? I love that. I love when Kent Hovind always talks about how muscly are. He's like, "Oh, my Paul with his big muscles in the cartoon." Like he always just he's just got nothing to work with. That guy.
We can talk about that separately if you want to, but yeah, we'll do the fossils first.
Okay, so this is just a little 1-minute clip from the video. I encourage everyone to go watch the full thing, but let's just watch this.
Ideas and not worry about who presented them. I just hope we don't have a pattern of exaggeration here, John. But carry on with the science.
We got a lot of great stuff we're going to share with you. Some really cool stuff about polystrata fossils.
Nice. Now, I like to keep Google open to look up phrases that I don't know, so let's get a tab open here with polystrate fossils. All of these results seem to come from creation-related sources. Why are there no geology sources here? Oh, I see. Geologists use an entirely different term for this phenomenon. They call it upright fossils, not polystrate. Now, why would creationists use a different name? It wouldn't be to make sure that believers see only conservative Christian worldview answers when they search, would it?
SearchCreation.org brings the top creation and apologetic websites together into one search engine while ignoring the thousands of sites that push lies and half-truths.
If I understand this right, Eric, it is kind of like Google that will only bring up a conservative Christian worldview answer on the topic. It's exactly what it is, and it's amazing. I'm telling you, I use this all the time now.
Oh, okay. That bodes poorly. Maybe we should just...
So that's the clip I wanted to show. And the reason I wanted to show that part is because they say it right there, like they're being sneaky. And when I first saw this, and I was like, why are they using a different word? Why are they? And I was like, they have to know what they're doing. They're being deceptive. And you go into it a bit more in the video, and I'll share it in the chat so people can bookmark it for later. Here's the link to the episode. But you share later that this problem was solved in geology hundreds of years ago. Like, but like the guy, they must know this. So how for fuck's sake, Paul? How can they not? They have to be being dishonest, right? Like, please, like, let me out of my misery. Something has to be going on here. Like, what's happening? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, this is a question I'm commonly asked, and I have just grown less and less comfortable actually answering for people's motivations. Like, it's how can I possibly? I can't look into their brain and know what their actual motivations are and know what they're regurgitating in good faith.
You're too kind. I knew this would happen.
But but I mean, they are deliberately, you're right, they are deliberately choosing to use, they're undeniably deliberately choosing to use phrases that is unique to their version of the narrative versus what someone will get if they Google something else. And this is probably a relatively new phenomenon for them. You know, it started in the mid-90s once search engines started happening. Because and then more and more, like when you watch even my latest Creation Today video, which was about they went to the Wisconsin Dells, and they were showing, you know, some of the geology that happened there that they think confirms. So again, they were using, and I've not forgotten, but I had geologist Stephen Bauman on. One thing I've gotten better about on my channel is actually, hey, I'm bigger channel now. I can actually invite like people who literally do this for a living to come on and explain it instead of my fumbling. But but no, this seems to be the common denominator is they invent their own phrases for it. Specific, that is deliberate. Like that is, if they wanted to go toe to toe with what the actual science says, they would use the same label that you would get when you go to Google Scholar and search for the scientific papers on it. But yeah, if you go to Google Scholar and type polystrate fossils, you will get not a single rebuttal, not a single one, because that's just, they came up with that phrase on their own. So that is a tactic. I'm not going to talk about motive, but it is a tactic that I think is dishonest. How's that?
Yeah, that's frustrating. Get Shannon in here. Shannon will come and lay down the hammer. And Shannon is she spares no. Correct me if I'm wrong.
She suffers no fools. Yeah, no.
That's it. I think she's been. I've been glancing at the chat here and there just to make sure everything's okay. And she's everyone's arguing with someone. It looks like I'm gonna let my mods deal with that so I can focus on the conversation. But Shannon's in there in the weeds. Thrown.
Excellent.
Thrown and wrestling. So is there? So for me, when I saw that, I was like, this appears very much deceptive to me. This appeared very much like I was being fooled. What else are they telling me that I will say lying about, or like misleading me about? Like, this is how I felt. Are there any other areas besides, like, is polystrate trees like the golden calf or the gold, the gold example? Or are there other examples that you think
in Young Earth Creationism? There's a myriad of them. There's like the starlight problem, which is again one of their phrases. There's the magnetic reversal, or they just put out, of course, that the magnetic fields are getting weaker and weaker, that the moon is getting closer. Like, they have their own, and pardon me, I don't have the phrases off the top of my head with this, but there's all of those. They've come up with their own description, and many more. Again, to encourage you, if you search for it, if you look for that answer, you're going to mostly find their material versus something else, because again, these are problems that scientists. If you, I made the mistake of, well, not a mistake. I went to learn from actual scientists, and it would bring up some of these issues, and they would like laugh. It's like, who's bringing that up? That's silly. Again, we've known the answer to that for 100 years. Or they really love when scientists still call something a problem, like the distant starlight problem. They've known the answer to the problem for hundreds of years, but they still, that's the way they describe. They use the word problem in the name of it. Yeah, just because at one point it was a thing to be solved, and so they point, they'll show up, throw a paper. It's still a problem. See, they still call it that. So there's lots of examples, and you can go on my channel, look in the creation playlists, and almost every time there's something like that they hinge it on.
My my uncle is Uncle Paul. He's as well, but he's a theist, I would say, in a broad sense. He'll say something like, I believe in God some days and other gods I don't, but he's very into Eastern, Hinduism, and he's a very, very smart guy. He's got a few science degrees, and he's really into use yoga and stuff like that. And he just didn't believe me that there are people that didn't accept evolution. Like, he was like, what? Like, God, no, there's no one. Like, he's like, oh, you're talking about like flat Earth people. I'm like, no, like, not like the vast majority. Like, what there was a stage in America where it was like over 50% or something. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It was even as when I yeah, in my lifetime, it's been as high as 66% of America felt that evolution was wrong. I believe it is down to below 50% now. That more than 50% accept evolution now, but it's not by much, like much more than that. So and it's weird. They phrase it oddly that it may encompass actually more. I don't love the polling question because it says like, are there problems with the evolutionary theory or something? And so you can kind of broadly sign on that you might have problems with it, even if you think it's generally true. All that said, that's a caveat you didn't need to hear. It's still bad. It's still bad. There's still swaths of America that I didn't come from no monkey, and that's what they think. So yeah, and
there's
Canada.
Yeah, right. So I haven't been over to either country, unfortunately, or those countries. But I want to get over there soon. So one of the things someone asked me recently, they said, I thought you were an atheist podcast. I'm like, it's not an atheist. This is an atheist podcast. I'm an atheist, but I'll talk to Christians. I've had Inspiring Philosophy on a few times. I'll talk to everyone. I don't care. Like deep conversations over deep drinks. That's what it is. Primarily my guests are atheists though. but my point is I try to be fair. I have a Spicy Dave Twitter account where I go after Frank Turek for his BS, and then there are other, then there's the Deep Drinks Twitter. I have two personalities, and this is more relaxed. I want people to be happy, kind. I want to talk about important things. So what I thought having you on, what a better guest to do it with. But I was wondering if we could steelman a Christian's worldview together. So let's say you're a creationist.
Mm-hmm.
Someone is a creationist. Maybe we won't say young earth creationist. I think that gets too hard. I think that's really hard to do. But let's say you're a creationist. You believe that that God created us, as the Bible said. Maybe it's poetic or something. How would you steelman that position? How could you make it work? Say if someone came to you and said, I don't want to get rid of my faith for whatever reason. Is there a way I can make this work? With your understanding of creationism and your understanding of the Bible, how would you do that? What's the best way you could do that, do you think?
So I think the best interpretation of Genesis 1 is the one that I don't think he came up with it, but that Hugh Ross espouses, and that is the perspective shift view of Genesis 1, where God is, where the narrator is kind of just trying to observe God and only has limited perspective, and so has this perspective of God in the first verse. The earth is formless and void, so obviously the earth exists at that point, but we know that's not how it all started. But then on the third day, like the narrator shifts and is on this weird earth. And then you can start to make some excuses as to why it appears like the stars were formed after the earth. Because if it was a cloudy sky, you wouldn't have been able to see the stars that obviously existed there for billions of years beforehand, and things like that. So I think, I won't dwell on that too long, but I think from the cosmology perspective, I think it's a relatively easy way to just interpret it that way. And that actually isn't uncompelling, other than the fact that weirdly we're still trying to say that the plants existed before the sun did, and that is biology, and that's problematic. But you can just kind of wave it away as figurative language, and the narrator didn't understand what they were, be it Moses or whoever. The narrator didn't understand everything that they were saying, so it's not God telling the story, right? Because God would be able to explain it in great detail. So if you talk about this imperfect narrator type thing, you kind of got that covered. And then if you're willing to say that God, there's two ways to view this, and I actually prefer the second way. So God, potentially in the first way, intervened at key points. So God put his finger on the earth for abiogenesis, said, okay, now chemistry will turn into biology, and I put my finger on it for that. And now I need invertebrates. So you're still accepting then that common descent, and you're still accepting descent with modification, all these kind of things. But what you're kind of rejecting is this idea that any element of randomness or natural selection is sufficient. that occasionally you need God to go, boop, that's the mutation I want. And boop, that's mutation again. And that to me is totally compatible with the God I believed in, that his acts of creation were in putting mutations at the various points where they needed to be, and that wouldn't have come about by chance. That's perspective one. Perspective two is that he, with his perfect knowledge, he reverse engineered this in such a way that he actually was cleverly actually made those mutations happen naturally, but because of the way he had planned things out. And I actually think that's actually that's the better God, the God that knew so well how all the pieces were going to lie, that, oh, that will be the mutation that result of all the radiation hitting in a certain way, and boom, the invertebrate mutation is going to happen here because I pre-planned it, as opposed to like sticking your finger in to the anthill and, you know, adjusting things. But either way, I think either of those are compatible with a creationist God, and still compatible with common descent. And then what you have to say is that when the wages of sin was death, and that the fall affected all of nature, what you have to say is, no, what the sin did was a spiritual death only, and that physical death obviously did exist on the earth prior to that. And that while Adam and Eve would have naturally lived to be thousands of years old, they would have eventually died. That was just part of it, because, of course, it doesn't seem like evolution makes a lot of sense if there's no death whatsoever. Like, imagine if no bacteria were dying.
Yeah.
Right? No fruit fly was dying. Like, just nothing was ever dying. You know, it seems hard to imagine. Obviously, not for billions of years could life have been sustained at those levels. So, so from a how did we get here creationist standpoint, I don't know. Does that make sense to you? Does that seem like
did
I miss any bases?
No, I think that works. Do you think so? Did you ever look at theistic evolution when you were deconstructing?
I did, and very much, and thought that was probably going to be the path I was going to go down. My hang up ended up being, first of all, a lot of New Testament stuff. Just the New Testament didn't make sense. But also, I'm pretty convinced that as I interpret the text in the most honest way that I can, that Paul and Jesus were also both young earth creationists. They both talked about Adam and Eve as literal people, the literal progenitors of the human race, with no one before them. So if both Paul and Jesus were all in on this young earth creationism narrative, that's problematic, right? Then their whole narrative is also suspect, besides the fact that there isn't, to me, enough evidence to corroborate the miracle claims, right? But the fact that if I'm going to accept the Bible as true, then they held to the problematic science. For me, I mean, while not a straw that broke the camel's back, certainly is a big problem. So,
wow. Well, you're incredibly insightful. I've got 100 more notes here to go over, but I'd spend all day and we wouldn't get you all night, and we wouldn't get there. But there's something I do want to touch on before we kind of get to a couple of super chats that we have. And if you got any questions, guys, super chat them and we will answer them. But one last thing I wanted to talk about is, you know, the emotional cost of everything that you've gone through. But not only that, but I asked you beforehand if we could talk about this, but when you shortly after you deconstructed, you were diagnosed with a serious illness. And how did that affect you? And did you ever, were there moments where you prayed? Were there moments where you thought about your faith again? Were there moments where it made you question if this was a punishment or something? Or like, what can you talk a little bit about the emotional cost of that?
Well, I didn't have to come up with the idea myself that it was a punishment, because very shortly after I was unfortunately outed not against my will, but I was outed. I didn't come out voluntarily. My community learned of it from other people who I thought I was safe talking to, and I wasn't. And so very, very quickly, without me having mentally prepared for it, the community shifted against me, and I was very scrambling and was left with not a lot of help. And in the merely weeks after that, I was forced to leave my home. There was just a lot of stuff going on. Then I started to notice something on my body that was just growing at alarming rates, and I went to a emergency room and got it taken out, and then it grew back again, like just every bit as big, like very, very quickly. And then, so they biopsied things, and it turns out I had an extremely rare version of cancer that, like, literally was in the triple digits. Like, only hundreds of people on the earth have even had the type of cancer that I had, such that I was subject to a scientific paper, in fact, even on the whole thing. But to answer your question, but I very quickly had people who hadn't spoken to me since, just gave me the complete silent treatment, managed to break their silence to throw over the fence at me. See the punishment God is giving you for rejecting him, and the way to cure this will be to come back. Like, I got the worst sentiments regarding that, just the least helpful takes. So there's some human defiance there, and it's kind of like, well, no, like that. I'm not buying that, and I'm not. So I didn't actually turn to God during my cancer times. I was like, this is my first big test of my new worldview, and can I get through it? And weirdly, I had these conversations with doctors. I was in the hospital every single day for years. So not at night, but during the day, and got to talk to nurses and all that stuff. I'm like, well, talk to me about miracles and talk to me about these things. And, I come to, when they start to they see you a lot and they start to open up to you, it's like the medical professions are like, yeah, we didn't have the techniques to actually help you with this cancer 8 years ago. Like 8 years ago, we would just cut your limbs off and you would have hoped for the best for you. And like all these things, we've been advancing, we've been working on this, and specifically even your case, we're trying certain things. And we get frustrated when the hospital policy is, if a patient thinks something is a miracle, you play along with it. You give them whatever hope they're supposed to get. Like it's part of their care, whatever thing gives them hope, you kind of play along. And so, then I hear down the hallway, hey, it's a miracle, and yay, the staff's agreeing. But no, it's literally the staff. I'm being a bit rambling here too, but I went through that weirdly. That was my first big test as a secular person. But as a result, it did mean that I went through probably the most challenging thing I ever went through with the least support, the smallest support team. I have a much bigger support team now than I did then. I continue to I owe everything to the tiny group of people who stuck by me and stuck with me through that. But no, the Christians they missed no opportunity to try and weaponize that against me in whatever way they could, sadly. And so, yeah, it was emotionally, it was rough. It was rough.
Yeah.
And at one point I had only 4 weeks to live. So at one point, the kind of cancer I had was, basically they're saying, like, if it ever hits your chest, we're not even going to try and do anything for you because it's so aggressive that we'll just try and make you comfortable. And suddenly, on one of my very regular checkups, they caught something in my chest that looked like it might be it. And they're like, well, we're going to x-ray this, we're going to biopsy, but you're going to have to sit for a couple of days, in this Schrodinger's, how much time do you have left situation. And I very much remember those few days that I had, they'll be the most vivid days of my life, I think, because it's where you're just facing, okay, I don't believe in the afterlife anymore, and I might only have 4 weeks. So now what? So it's literally, it's that face-to-face is this a phase? Is this a fad? Am I going to Pascal wager this because I want fire insurance? It was a little bit more of a atheist boot camp than I wanted, shall we say. Anyway, I say it somewhat with a smile and somewhat flippantly now that it's a few years past, but at the time, you mentioned my cartoon. I started making videos while I was still quite sick. And one of the things that I knew from working in the film industry and entertainment industry was that how you present yourself matters. And if you're presenting yourself as a sickly person, sorry, my Siri just kicked in there. It was talking to me. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah. Then that makes a difference, right? So I had an animation background and had things. Oh, you know what I can do is I can make myself a cartoon and just use my voice, and I could even hear it in that last video of myself that I was, I was still while I was sick. That was why I did that. Now, I didn't ever want to tell anyone that. That wasn't a thing I wanted to advertise, and so now that that's more publicly known, it actually does make the people who complain about it seem even maybe more petty than they should be, right? Like it's like, yeah, because you just didn't want to appear as the scrawny, bald person who with caved in face and eyes. Like chemo man isn't gonna put forth as compelling a narrative. So I laugh. I agree. Like, coming from a comic background, I probably Superman myself a little more than I should have. But you're over. we all overcompensate for things. As it were.
No, I totally. I just think I didn't pick that up really until Kent kept going on about it, just because it's just funny that it feels like he has nothing else to talk about.
He also is vastly convinced that I changed my voice. That still keeps coming up, and I don't know.
What do you mean?
That I deepen my voice somehow, or like that in post that I slow it down and add bass to it or whatever. I'm like, I literally have a live channel now where I'm just talking to people. I don't know what kind of voice changer you think
you need to.
I've also gone to conventions. Like people have recordings of me speaking live. Like I don't know how I'm changing my voice live exactly. There's some insecurity, I think, on when you have a baritone voice that maybe that's something he aspires to. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just wait till Jordan Peterson comes after you for the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, because even you're in production as well. That that you do add things to your voice naturally. Like you sharpen things up in the editing and stuff. But I don't pick up like that you've like overlaid the sound of like dragons breathing as you like talk.
That's a great idea. I should do that. That's awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for coming on. Can we just do a couple of quick super chats?
Absolutely.
And thank you everyone who was super chatted.
Thank you, everyone.
I have a few comments. Sylvia Patron said, I so needed to hear your story. Thanks. So I appreciate.
You're very welcome. I'm glad it helps in whatever way it helped. That's great.
Bible Unboxed said, my friend works for the New South Wales government. Koalas take 15 years to learn to use nature bridges over roads and stuff. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what. So they're just.
So Ken Ham would say, well, there weren't any roads. The flood just happened. They didn't need any nature bridges. Yeah. But I don't know how the water probably was the problem. Anyway.
D, also a Patreon supporter. Thank you for the $10 super chat. How did Paul deal with things like Adam's age in the Bible when he was a believer?
I just accepted that on its face value. Like I've now come to think that probably it was some mix of, they probably believed it, but that there were also figurative numbers. It's amazing how all the patriarchs, their ages ended at double zeros, right? Like they lived exactly that long. And that, I don't know. Like for me, I didn't seem implausible that Adam would live 900 years. Like that didn't seem and then some of the notions that, how did Moses end up being able to have all the knowledge that he would need to write the whole Pentateuch? Well, all of a sudden the difference, all of a sudden, like these generations are all living side by side, right? Because they're living so long. So that reduces some of the plausibility. I don't know. How did you deal with the ages? Like for me, if you're going to buy into donkeys are talking and snakes are talking and virgin births and all that kind of stuff, you know, someone living for a long time isn't the biggest of the plausibility problems.
I remember I started reading my children's Bible when I was, I don't know, grade 7 or something, just randomly. I go up to the part where it's like, and Noah was 300 years old. And I was like, when he finished the ark, and I remember looking at, like, raising an eyebrow at the text and going, come on, like, really? Like, and I remember just thinking and then just pushing it to the side of my brain, like, oh, well, I'm sure there's an answer for that somewhere.
So also the way it was depicted to me in art and things like that was kind of a Highlander situation where
I haven't seen Highlander.
But the premise in Highlander is at some point you stop, or a vampire situation. Maybe a vampire is more familiar, right? At some point you just, that's the point where you become immortal. And whatever age you are there, you're just kind of locked into that age, as opposed to that. So probably in my mind, Noah at 80 and Noah at 300 looked identical. Like that they were just, you know, that was part of God's process. And I mean, because we also have to imagine, so Cain and Abel, that situation happens, right? The sons of Adam and Eve. And we have to, I always forget which killed which. Cain killed Abel. Yeah. So Cain needs to, he's afraid when God wants to punish him. He's like, but the people out there, they're going to hurt me. So you now have to think, well, they are young enough that Adam and Eve had enough kids to populate a whole other town. Right? Because there has to be a whole other town worth of people to send him to. So then you actually kind of need... Yeah, so those are all his brothers and sisters, but you also then kind of need Adam to be 900. Because we're not imagining that Eve's still only having one baby a year. So
does she go through menopause still at 50? Like,
yeah, presumably, like, you're not at 50. No, I'm probably at,
500?
At 600 or something. Yeah, right.
Oh, jeez. It's
anyway, D, I'm curious what you think, but
I do remember D saying that that she first heard about it in, I think, kids' church. I think this was you, D, and you said you first heard about it in kids' church and you laughed because you thought they were joking. But that it's wild. So from your lovely partner Shannon Q, thank you for the $5 super chat. What would Paul say to a loving is that
Christian? XIIN is usually Christian.
Brain genius in the chat who says he's only an atheist because he was already silly enough to be a young earth creationist. Okay.
That's not entirely implausible, frankly. That I have thought about that. Like, so people have accused me of shifting from one fundamentalism to another. And if you are the kind of a black and white thinker that I was, I still, in a way, I acknowledge that I'm kind of a black and white thinker. And that for me, like the scriptures, I don't care if the scriptures contain some kind of philosophical truth or literary truth in the small t way that it's kind of speaking to you. Like, that's fine, but it doesn't, unless it's true in the conforms to reality sense, I don't actually care. And so I acknowledge my own limitations in like just that kind of subtlety I am disinterested in. And so if God doesn't care that the Bible is historical or not, and that the entire thing is a metaphor, and that it's supposed to speak to something ethereal that can never be measured, I'm just screwed, because that's not the way my brain works. And so I'm never going to latch on to that. So if your Christianity is so pliable that no fact can falsify any of it, and there are lots of Christians like that, I can't follow you there. So if that's what you mean, but if you mean that I was like, that I'm intellectually inferior, like that's also possible. that I'm one of the dumber specimens on earth and I fell for that, and I'm currently atheist, then God has still, that's fine then, but through no fault of my own, I'm too dumb to know that the real God exists, and there's nothing I can do about that. Like if God's threshold of intelligence for salvation is here and I'm below it, what am I supposed to do? Like nothing. I'm just screwed. So
I love that you've given a serious answer to this troll in the chat, but that's amazing.
Okay.
Not Shannon, you weren't the troll. You're talking about the troll, which I assume is a troll. I'm just basing off your comment. I haven't read the comments, but
it's embarrassing. Like it's totally embarrassing that I used to like talk about criterion of embarrassment. I go around on channels and admit that I thought the Earth was 6,000 years old, and that I thought there were dinosaurs on the Ark, and like that is, it's embarrassing. It's still embarrassing, and it is an ego hit still to this day. Like I'm not gonna lie.
There's we're talking before about spiritual experiences and you know having that divine revelation or something, and I've thought about this. It's like I used to have, if someone held a gun to my head and made me denounce Jesus when I was a Christian, I would have taken the bullet. Like I just was, I was devout. I really believe what I believed. Now I don't know if someone held a gun to my head and told me, is your worldview so sound that you will risk it for, I don't know if I would die for I don't even know. I don't really have I don't know. But the point is, like, it made me really nervous about, like, what if I'm not, like, what if what I'm believing now is totally, like, I'm totally, unconvinced.
Well, so the Christian, like, we literally have these things. It never happened to me, but to contemporaries of mine, they would literally, like, have youth leaders come and, like, while they were on the bus, they would have men dressed up. This is pre 9/11. With guns, right? And come on the bus with the 13-year-old kids and say, we renounce Jesus right now. And, like, play act the thing to try and scare them, to try and, like, recreate these things, which is terribly abusive things to do. And I hope that doesn't happen anymore. But if you were going to take that bullet for Jesus, in your head, the second that bullet gets to the other side of your skull, you're with Jesus, right? You and I now, if the bullet goes through our skull, we know that is it. Like this is the one and only life we get. So the Christian has the easier answer because that just gets them home faster. You and I don't have that. We have to, that would just be the end of David and Paul. That would just be done. So, but I've gotten over my fear of death on that front on a lot of ways. So fine.
The thing, well, I guess my point that I was trying to get to, and again, the rum has helped with me with this not being very coherent, but the point is that I think that
my camera's had too much to drink. Holy cow! All right.
I hate when it does that. That's what's funny. It's just like stuck out of blur, out of focus. But there we go. That's better. It's just not.
It's
not funny.
We'll keep talking. We'll figure.
But if I had this like amazing experience, and I was like, it was more powerful than any experience I've ever had before in my entire life. What I've said to myself is, I hope that wouldn't convince me of the existence of God. Like, I hope an experience wouldn't. Like, I hope I would be intellectually honest enough to admit that there could be something else going on there. And even if I did become a Christian for circumstances like that, for like a divine or a personal experience, Noah's Ark would still be demonstrably false. Evolution would still be demonstrably true. Like there'd be the Bible would still have problems. Like, no, it doesn't solve any of the problems that a lot of people come to me and chat with me about. I'm always message Michael Jones and we're friends, but I troll him and we have a banter back and forth and we pick on each other. And I sent him some Lord of the Rings tattoos, and I said, when are we getting a matching tattoo? Because we both like Lord of the Rings. And he said, when you convert to Christianity. And I said, do you believe in once saved, always saved? Because I could technically still be in the club. Let's get tattoos, baby. And he just shook his head. But yeah, it's all the same things that I'm still talking about. It's not like an experience where then nullify them. I don't reach the conclusion based on intuition. I reach the conclusion based on evidence and reason, and which
that's where I would have to. You asked me if I went into the more liberal type of Christianities, and that's where I would then need to, if I became convinced that God is real, then I would need to come to some kind of conclusion and resolution on Noah's Ark and prophecy and when these books were written and who the authors were. Like, I would have a lot of work to do for sure. I would probably need to also come to the idea that the biblical inerrancy is not actually something that the Bible even teaches. That's something that the Western Church has kind of layered upon it later.
Well, I said this to Megan Lewis of Digital Hammurabi, and she's a Christian, and I said, where in the Bible does it say that? Sorry, this is a bit of a rant, but where in the Bible does it say that we need to take everything, oral traditions and everything, and write it all down and preserve it, and then use it for 2,000 years to argue about LGBT rights and abortions? It doesn't say that. And I said, in fact, God gave us, according to the Bible, of course, but God gave us the Holy Spirit to be the witness and to go, and he told us to go preach the gospel and to use the power of the Holy Spirit. And I was like, what if it was the devil's plan all along to canonize the Bible, to put all these things in writing? You could say the devil did it. It's confused everyone. Really, the Holy Spirit should be witnessing to people. But of course, I'm using the Bible there to build that theology, those ideas. So it kind of falls apart. But it's interesting, and she kind of
but
you could argue that.
But the answer to that is the best lies contain kernels of truth. Like, so if you were the devil and you were the best liar that ever existed, every statement you made would be 99% true. And just have the one bit of like, if you look at Genesis 3, where Satan is talking to Eve, or retcon Satan, it was the serpent originally. Everything he said was actually true, right? It was just this weird spin on it. So, like, the serpent doesn't lie at any point. So we're way off. Yeah, but anyway, I'm with you on that.
One last super chat, and of course, Dee also mentioned, and I can't even remember if I brought this up, but yes, I got kicked out. She got kicked out for laughing at in kids' church about that she thought they were joking about the age of people. Okay, Hemfer She, what do you? Thank you for the $10 super chat. What do you think made the writers of the Torah stick with the ANE/Babylon combat myth and flat Earth rather than Pythagoras/ Anaxagoras and Aristotle in their Hellenistic world? Oh my gosh, sorry about the reading of that, but
so the writers of the Torah, I'm going to place the Pentateuch around, say, 1200 to 900 BC.
Really? Okay.
And was that earlier or later than you thought I was going to say?
I thought the earliest mention we had of Israel was the Merneptah Stele at wasn't it 600 BC? Maybe I'm getting confused. Ignore me.
So
continue.
Anyway, and whatever you want to say, but I'm going to put it around there. So, your Hellenistic period, if you want to even be the most generous and start that with Alexander the Great, that's not even, that's pre-Rome, but if you want to start that, that's 400 or 500 BC, if I remember correctly. The Rome has kicked in a little bit, but I still think there's the point is, I still think there's a time gap between when Genesis was written, when the Pentateuch, and probably the precursors of the Pentateuch, right? Because it's obvious the Pentateuch is a stitched together version of many other documents. So who knows how far those documents that they stitched together go back. I just don't think the authors of those had an opportunity to incorporate Hellenistic ideas. It's very clear that Genesis chapter 1 is a response to the Mesopotamian Enuma Elish creation story. I don't think it was intended to be a copy of it. I don't think it's intended to be that's where they got the ideas. I think what it was intended to say was, you've got your creation story. Our creation story is yours, but better, because we have one God instead of a bunch of them, and they're not fighting. It's so clearly to me, the author knew of the other, and it was just, this was one of those situations, our God is better than your God type of situations. And so when you're in that paradigm, it doesn't make any sense to switch over. Now the question may rightfully be, why didn't Second Temple era Jews then, who would have then had exposure to those ideas, reject it? And I think what I'm not convinced that the Old Testament is as flat Earth and whatever the opposite of, well, no, heliocentric. Heliocentric is the right word. No, that's what we are. The opposite of whatever heliocentric is. I don't think it is as literal as that would be, because again, that would be taking it in the way that a Ken Ham would take it, and there seems to be some evidence that even before Jesus came around, that long ages of the earth was part of at least some of the Jewish tradition. That there was some young Earth creationism may well be a 18th century philosophy thing, not a BC philosophy. Does that answer the question? I am now rambling. David, what do you think? Did I answer that question? I think there was a time gap. I don't think it was written.
There was an answer in there, and this is what I love about deep drinks. And this is the drinks start flowing, and I've done some long episodes with Dr. Kip Davis where we're drinking straight whiskey, and you can go at the start of the episode, look at our face and how we're talking, and then go to 3 hours in, and we're like slurring our speech. I'm looking for the end button, like so.
I have a show on my channel that's like that, but we talk about conspiracy theories, so it gets more fun.
Oh, that's exciting. Well,
anyway, the short answer is I think I'm convinced that the Pentateuch part of the New Testament was written before the Pythagoras and all those area people came into being. That's my short answer. I could be wrong about that, but that seems to be the way I take it.
Awesome. Well, we are pretty well. We've gone over time. And someone said before, where's Dr. Josh when you need him? And unfortunately, he ducked in to drop this comment. Oh, please keep suppressing the truth in unrighteousness, atheists. You can't deny the evidence of the flood from 2541 BC. So he always drops in to leave a troll comment like that and then ducks out. So unfortunately, he wasn't here when we actually needed him to talk about the start of Israel. But
that's all right.
With that said, two things. If you haven't subscribed or gone over to Paulogia, first of all, what are you doing? This is an amazing channel. But more importantly, you got a new channel, Paulogia Live.
I do.
And it is
I could use your help. If you're tired of the cartoon and the fake muscles and all that kind of garbage and the fake voice and all that kind of stuff, and you're tired of things that are scripted and where I've fact checked myself, and if you prefer ramblings like we just did for 90 minutes, this is the channel for you. Paulogia Live.
And I have watched a few more episodes than I have clicked. Oh, Miss Lemon. I didn't know you had Miss. That's cool. Miss Lemon's cool. I like Miss Lemon. Which has been on Deep Drinks. I have watched a few more episodes than it shows up. I've got a couple of different YouTube accounts.
No, I'm not worried about you. No reason you need to.
Judging.
On that channel, of course, you can go find my 2 full-length conversations with Eric Hovind as well, if you're interested in young Earth creation conversations.
No way.
Yeah,
I've had conversations.
Yeah, 2. I had a very long one on his that was on his channel, and he had one on mine. So if you look at
okay,
so they won't, neither of them would be on the live section. You'd want to go to the videos section.
Yeah.
And I don't know, they're anyway, go find Eric Hovind, because and then I've had debates, and
man, you got some amazing guests on here too. I need to dive more deeper into this channel. This is this is awesome.
Anyway,
well, everyone go subscribe.
Yeah.
For sure. And thank you so much, Paulogia, for coming on. You played a massive role in helping me go through the often hard time in my life of deconstruction. And I've shown my beautiful wife your clips as well. I'm sure you've helped her. And you've helped so many people. And I just you are insightful. You are, I think, what's the word that you disagree with at the start?
So I'm not a beacon. I am a cautionary tale. And I will fight you on that. Cautionary tale. I made all the mistakes. And so if my array of mistakes can help a few people avoid a few of them, that's, I guess, well-served time.
Well, okay, I'll give you that. You're a cautionary tale, but a great tale at that. Thank you so much, Paul G, for coming on. Guys, check out his channel. Links to everything is in the description. And make sure you subscribe. There's a little banner I'll put up. We have some exciting guests coming up. The Trans Center for Apostasy and Debauchery, Arden Hart and Professor Matthew Monger coming up to discuss Genesis. This is actually what we were talking about before, Mesopotamian roots. So it's going to be really good. So, and if you want to support the channel, of course, Patreon, join the channel, Super Chat, all very thankful. And I'll see you guys later.